Welcome to Donu's World. Hello everyone. Thank God it's Friday. Welcome to Donu's World. Last week I said that I had problems with the idea of Black people playing roles that aren't authentic within the context of essentially white dramas. And I just thought I should mention this week something that some of my viewers reminded me of, which is a really wonderful series of books called The Number One Ladies Detective Agency, set in Botswana, with a sort of very beguiling, likable lady detective as the star of the show. And it's been televised, and it's great. That's the kind of thing I mean when I say that instead of Black people trying to insert themselves in narratives like Romeo and Juliet or James Bond that are essentially white, they should be creating vehicles, dramatic vehicles for themselves, like this Number One Ladies Detective Agency, that allow them to shine in an authentic context. Thank you very much for all the people who get back to me whenever I ask questions on this series or make points, because even if you disagree with me, the feedback is still very useful. As long as you're not abusive or very unreasonable, I don't mind people not agreeing with me. Okay, so today I was reminded of something that's quite interesting, because a friend of mine called me this morning and spoke about an experience his cousin had with a native doctor here in Nigeria, where I live. They call such people different names: Babalawo, Marabouts. Well, I don't know. Well, let's just say that these are people who practice traditional beliefs, which in some cases fall under the heading of Juju. And my friend was telling me about his cousin. His cousin wanted a job, a senior government job. And when he approached someone to help him with the application process, the person said to him, well, you need to come and see someone with me, and there you will be taught the tricks of the trade and about how to go about these things. So my friend's cousin went along with the guy he wanted, to use as a mentor, and they got to a hotel room, and there was this Juju priest or native doctor, and I mean, apparently this is very common. It's for people to, because here we are Christians and we are Muslims, but you also have what we call animists, who believe in the old traditional religions. And I'd say that a lot of the Christians and Muslims also believe in the old traditional religion underneath the surface. So, they're Christians by day, and by night they are believers in ancient African religions. And I'm told, because I know absolutely nothing about it, because my parents were totally opposed to traditional religion, and they were staunch Catholics. So, we never had any briefings as children about how this other parallel belief system works. But, people who do know a bit about it, or a lot about it, have told me that it's not always about evil spells and, sort of blood sacrifices and cutting chickens' heads off, or whatever you're supposed to do when you enter that world, when you're trying to achieve something. It sometimes is it's a force for good, apparently, allegedly. Anyway, so my friend's cousin gets to this hotel and walks in, and there's this native doctor waiting for him. The guy is dressed normally, doesn't, in normal Nigerian traditional, outfit, doesn't look particularly scary or anything. So some of them do look scary because they've got things smeared on their faces, and they've got feathers in their hair and all kinds of, outlandish outfits. Anyway, So he sits down and he waits for this. He's a bit shocked actually, because he didn't realize that such senior government people would resort to this type of tactic. So he thinks, hey, he keeps an open mind and he sits down. And all of a sudden, instead of the native doctor starting to talk or pray for him or give him advice, he suddenly gets very angry and tells him to get the hell out of that hotel room. He doesn't want him near. He sort of goes, there's something about this guy that the native doctor doesn't like. So he never did get that government job. I mean, I'm sure many people who get government jobs get them without going down that path, but I hear there's a lot of people who do get government jobs go down that path and believe that that is the reason they got the job. So this story reminded me of something that happened when I lived in London as a young person many, many, many years ago. At that age, we were all in our sort of early 20s, early to mid 20s, me and my friends. And we went through a phase of going to see fortune tellers or clairvoyants, which I suppose is the white equivalent of the native doctor or the soothsayer, because the African version also talk about the future. Allegedly, they tell you if you're going to win the election, or whether you're going to get the job or the husband that you want or the wife that you want. They predict the future, some of them anyway. And so in Europe, in London, you have people, and in America, and I'm sure all over the world, you have people, white people, who do the same thing. And so I went through this phase with my friends of going to see these people. And I remember one we called Stan the Man, who lived in North London. Very, very exciting guy. I say exciting because honestly, I swear, he told me things that he could not have known in any other way except through some kind of supernatural experience or knowledge, I mean, for example, when I walked through the door, he told me that I had a grandmother who had died and that her name began with M, and that she was there in the room with me, and that she was actually with me most of the time, watching over me. And he closed his eyes and then he said, her name begins with M, and then he said, it's Martha. I was completely taken aback because my grandmother had died many years before when I was a little girl. And none of my English friends, I've never discussed her with my English friends. And the person who introduced me or gave me the phone number of this Stan the Man, his real name was Stanley, knew nothing about my grandmother back in Africa. It's an English friend. So that was really scary, that somebody should know what my grandmother was called. And he then, Stanley, went on to make several other predictions. I have to tell you that practically all of them have come true. I mean, I'm 64 now, and I was about 22 then. I also have to tell you that, at the time, I mean, who knew whether they would come true or not, but he knew a lot about my life as it was, and about some of my, inner dreams and some of my weaknesses. And he said something that really, really struck me, and this has been so true of my life. He said, you have champagne class and champagne taste, but you're always going to have a beer income unless you change in certain ways. I mean, in case anybody doesn't fully understand that, what it means is that, I have high expectations and expensive desires, but wasn't going to make that much money unless I changed the way I did certain things. So that's just an interesting comment that's very true of my character. And then he also told me that, anyway, I won't tell you everything he told me because I've already told you the most stunning thing that he told me, which was my grandmother's name. and the fact that she was always there with me. And why I believed it was A, he got the name right, and nobody else could have told him. No living person around me in London could possibly have told him that. And B, when I was little, my grandmother and myself were so close. People said that, I remember sitting down with her on a step outside the family home in Port Harcourt here in Nigeria. And I remember her talking to me in Igbo, which was her language. And apparently I spoke Igbo with her quite fluently. The two of us were like a little little cabal together. And we communicated with each other intimately. And after we were separated by the Civil War, I never spoke a word of Igbo again. It's very strange because I still understand Igbo, but I can't speak it. But apparently, when I was with her, I was completely fluent. Anyway, so I was very close to my grandmother. Some white guy in London spots this, 20 years later, and quite extraordinary. Now, the reason I've sort of gone a bit ahead of myself, because the reason why the story about the native doctor in the Nigerian hotel room that happened very recently reminded me of what happened when I was young in London is because a girlfriend of mine had a similar experience. I won't tell you her name. I'll just tell you that she was a young professional starting out in life like the rest of us. And when she got wind of the fact that I and some other friends were seeing a guy, a clairvoyant, a fortune teller called Peter, who lived in Chelsea, which is a part of London, she said, "Oh, I want to come too." Now, we used to go individually, but, it was like there would be 20 of us and we'd all go and see the same guy at some point or the other, or same lady, because there were lady clairvoyants and fortune tellers as well. And so this friend of mine, girlfriend, said, let me just call her Jane. Jane said, I really, really want to see Peter. That was the fortune teller. So gave her his phone number, and she made an appointment to go and see him. And when she got to Peter's door, I'd seen Peter, lots of other friends had seen Peter. We'd all been quite impressed by him. He'd known stuff about us that we'd never told anybody else, and stuff that he could not have found out in any way except through a supernatural path that we believed. And so Jane gets there, and Peter opens the door of his apartment in Chelsea, and he looks at her, and he says, no. He says, too much pain. Sorry. No. I can't see you. And she was really devastated, She left and called me in tears and said, I know I've got a lot of problems, but the way this guy reacts, I was hoping my problems would be solved, but the way this guy has just reacted, it's like I'm going to have a whole lifetime of pain. Or maybe even not a whole lifetime. Maybe I'm going to die. She was really, really, traumatized. And I was quite angry with the guy because, he was more or less telling her that her life wasn't worth, it was going to be too awful for him to talk about. So, but guess what? One disaster after another. Jane had the most extraordinary bad luck. She has now passed away, but I can't tell you, nothing worked for her. Her job, she was very good at her job, but there would always be some obstacle or problem preventing her from succeeding in the profession she'd chosen. Her personal life, disastrous. Her parents were highly toxic. Her siblings were highly toxic. She was the one keeping the family afloat and doing everything she could for her relatives. And they never showed any gratitude. They treated her like dirt. Romance. She had a couple of boyfriends, and they were quality men. But again, nothing went right. It was all very devastating and awful. And she never got married. I'm not saying that getting married is the ultimate, proof of success in your personal life, but she just never even had one single romance that went fairly well. And she wound up alone. And then she died prematurely. I can honestly say that I have never known anybody as unhappy or as unlucky as Jane. And Peter Lee saw it. And that was why he must have upset her so much by saying that, but he probably felt that he would upset her even more if he told her what he saw in her future. So, I don't see fortune tellers anymore. I haven't seen them for years and years and years. Because at that time it was part entertainment and part, sort of emotional counseling. We used to see them because we were worried about our boyfriends or about our jobs or about life. Young women can be very anxious and neurotic, and we certainly were. I certainly was at that time. And so, it became almost like an obsession. Every couple of weeks, you'd be going off to see some new clairvoyant. And frankly, there were some who were just rubbish. You could see that they were sort of like milking you for information. They didn't know anything. They were just trying to sort of like pull a fast one and get money from people. But like I said, there were some like Peter and Stan who were outstanding. By the time I had become a journalist, I'll give you one example. I went to see a lady fortune teller in London. And I decided, because at that time it was very unusual for a black person to be a journalist. There were hardly any black journalists around. And so I decided to stereotype myself. So I dressed like someone who was into the sporting professions, because black people were much more into things like sport at that time. So I dressed up like someone who was maybe an aerobics teacher, and I went to see this lady. I've forgotten her name actually. As soon as I walked through the door, and she just said, "You're a writer and you're going to be very successful, at least, within your profession. You're going to be a pioneer," she said. And it turned out to be true. Like, there were some British newspapers and places where I was the first black person to work there. And so she was very accurate as well. Okay, so my life became a lot more complicated and, in some ways, a lot more difficult as I got older. But I stopped seeing clairvoyants and fortune tellers a long time ago, but I stopped seeing clairvoyants and fortune tellers a long time ago because my father got wind of the fact that my friends and I, that this was our favorite hobby. And he was absolutely furious. He said, apparently Christianity frowns on what they call soothsaying, and somehow it's linked to the occult and black magic and necromancy, which is to do with summoning up the spirits of the dead. And he really put the fear of God into me and told me I must absolutely stop going to see these people. He also said that it wasn't any use because they only saw fragments. They never saw the whole picture. So someone might tell you, "Oh, your grandmother's name is Martha," or "Oh, you're going to be a writer," or "Oh, you're going to be a successful writer." But they might not tell you that you're also going to become a drug addict when you're 47, or that you're going to get a divorce. By the way, I did meet a clairvoyant who told me that my marriage wouldn't last. She said this to me within 6 months of me getting married. I was so upset, and yet she was right at the end of the day. Anyway, so I said all this to my father. He said, "It doesn't matter. They just tell you fragments. And then because they need to make a living, they create this sense of omniscience, of knowing everything, but they only know bits, that assuming that they do have some kind of supernatural skill. So it's no use if you only get to hear bits and pieces, and if you don't get the complete picture." So he banned me from going. And, as many people have asked over the years, if they're so great, these clairvoyants and fortune tellers, why don't they just tell us the number of the winning lottery ticket? Then we can, actually gain something concrete from going to see them. Anyway, I look back on those days with a little bit of nostalgia, because it was fun, but it was also scary. I mean, because you would wonder where these people are getting this information from. And some of them, none of the ones I went to see, but some of the ones my friends went to see, talked about getting information from the dead, from your relatives, from the other side. They would close their eyes and they would say they were communing with your dead relatives or friends or whatever. One thing Stan the man never did was claim to be in touch with my grandmother. He only said that he saw her standing behind me at all times and that she had followed me into the room where I met him. So I just wonder whether any of my viewers on this YouTube channel, whether any of you see soothsayers or juju priests or native doctors or clairvoyants or whatever you want to call them. Have any of you participated in seances where people sit around the table and try to summon up the spirits of the dead? By the way, we did that in my school at one point. And when the nuns found out, they were absolutely furious, and we all got into trouble. And I got to tell you that during one of those sessions, which was led by my friend Yvonne, during one of those sessions when we're all sitting around doing this Ouija board thing and going, this is trying to connect to the other world, the world of the dead, and then you have all these letters around the table and it spells out messages, allegedly. I can't remember any meaningful messages being spelled out, but I do remember that we did it once in a classroom in my school in London, and there was this great big crucifix that was on the wall. Had been there, it was always there. And while we were doing it, that crucifix fell off the wall. It just fell, bam, like that. And so, that was enough to put me off seances for life. But I still went back to fortune tellers and stuff after I left school for a good 5 years as a young woman, until Daddy found out. And I'm a daddy's girl, so I did almost everything he told me to do. And but like I said, I would really like to know if any of you now, as adults, mature people, still believe in all those things. Have you ever believed? Do you believe now? And have fortune tellers or juju priests ever been useful to you? Do tell me, because as you get older, you start asking more questions about spiritual matters again, and you become more interested in the spiritual, because I guess you're closer to death. And so, feedback, please, feedback. Tell me about your experiences. Thank you.